the old Soviet Union, where they doped athletes, often in a way that was deeply detrimental to their health, because they wanted to show that they could beat the West on an objective stage like sport. Cuba and Castro with his amateur boxers. Putin has been Putin, before the Olympic Games in Sochi, do you remember the Winter Olympics? His approval rating was for him pretty low at 60%. After Sochi, it ran up to 80%, and he used that collateral in part to invade Crimea.
And now you're looking then at Russian participation in the Olympics. Tell us about your piece.
Yeah, so a year ago, just to give the context, John, if I may, the Culture Secretary, Lucy Fraser, gave a pretty eloquent speech at the Council of Europe saying that Britain should not endorse the participation of Russian athletes at the Olympic Games, which is coming up this summer. And her argument, I thought, was very cogent. She said it is absolutely disgraceful, the illegal war that is being perpetrated on Ukraine, but it has a sporting dimension too, because more than 400 talented Ukrainian athletes have been killed. There's good evidence to suggest that one was tortured before being murdered by Russian military. And in addition, war crimes are being perpetrated, of course. Rape of women, mutilation of prisoners, the abduction of children. The sporting infrastructure of Ukraine has been decimated. The funding of their athletes has been redirected to the military. So in what sense would it be fair for Russia to get an advantage at the Olympics when Ukraine has been treated in the way that it has? In addition, she rightly notes that even if they compete under a neutral flag, these Russian athletes, as soon as they get back, any success will be leveraged mercilessly by Putin to bolster his own legitimacy, as he has already done since the Winter Olympics. He poses with these athletes. And so she came out strongly against it and implied that government policy wouldn't change. And then, about 8-9 days ago, John, we discover that the UK sports minister, somebody called Stuart Andrew, had written to the IOC saying we no longer oppose. But the participation of Russian athletes, they didn't announce this publicly, this shift in government policy. And when they were approached by my colleague, Matt Lawton of The Times, they would not admit that this letter had been sent officially. They only admitted it privately. And then they appealed to senior executives at this newspaper to dilute the story. We refused. I think this is a scandal both for the decision and for the cowardly, gutless inability for a minister to come out and defend it.
Yeah, I'm baffled at the idea that this country, having spoken out so strongly through Lucy Fraser, could execute a U-turn and hope that would not be noticed in the first place, and then to seek to try and cover it up after it's pulled out into the open is doubly bewildering. What on earth is going on?
Well, what we now think is another great piece in the sports section of The Times, this time by Martin Ziegler. He thinks that what was going on is that the International Olympic Committee, which is frankly quite a deeply corrupt organisation, has been for decades, said to the UK government that if you wish to host some qualification events in London for new Olympic sports like skateboarding and breakdancing, you cannot oppose the participation of Russian athletes. In other words, we changed our stance on a matter of profound geopolitical significance so that we could host a breakdancing event in Stratford. That is what I read into that story, and as far as I understand it, has not yet been denied.
And giving way to the flimsiest kind of pressure. And you discuss how far this went up the food chain politically. I mean, even that it might have been done in an isolated space down the food chain.
Well, this is what I speculate on in the piece. Did Stuart Andrew, the sports minister, act unilaterally? I find it difficult to believe that Lucy Fraser, who gave a remarkable speech at the Council of Europe, could have known about it. Did Rishi Sunak know? And if he was acting unilaterally, effectively shifting policy on behalf of us who vote for them and whom they serve, without letting his superiors know, I think it is remarkable. And at some point, surely, it's the lead story, I think, on our letters pages of The Times tomorrow. If a minister can't come out and defend it, it is an affront as well to democracy.
And you got some big names who have took a stand equally strong as Lucy Fraser's in the past. People like Lord Coe. Well, they seem very compromised now, don't they?
Well, Lord Coe, I think, quite courageously has said he is the president of the World Athletics Federation. We will not allow Russian athletes or Belarusians to participate in the athletics events. And also an artist called Max I can't quite remember. It's a double-barreled surname. He has come out. He was the official artist for the British Olympic Association, for the Team GB, if you like. And after he read these pieces in the Times, he said his conscience would not allow him to do it, and he has withdrawn. For what it's worth, all of the letters, without exception, has been opposed to what the government has done. I've spoke to ministers, former Conservative ministers, who were appalled at it. So I think this is a story, John, if I can put it this way, that will run until the point when the government is prepared to fess up as to what has actually happened.
Yeah, I mean, you can only speculate on this, but would you imagine the government may be forced into yet another U-turn and end up facing the way they did before?
I very much hope so, because take a step back, John. Think of how sport, for dictators in particular, has been a source of legitimacy. Think of the old Soviet Union, where they doped athletes, often in a way that was deeply detrimental to their health, because they wanted to show that they could beat the West on an objective stage like sport. Cuba and Castro with his amateur boxers. Putin has been Putin, before the Olympic Games in Sochi, do you remember the Winter Olympics? His approval rating was for him pretty low at 60%. After Sochi, it ran up to 80%, and he used that collateral in part to invade Crimea. Putin has consistently said that he wants Russian athletes to participate on a global stage and win. And Zelensky, with all he has on his plate, has come out and said this is something of tremendous importance to him personally, that we isolate Russia in a sporting context.
Why do the powers that be in athletics, the powers behind the Olympics, why do they take the view that they take? Why are they willing to allow the participation of Russian athletes under this sort of what could be called a false flag, a sort of neutral flag?
For the same reason, I think, that they were willing to host the Olympic Games in Munich in 1936, when Hitler, quite self-consciously, was using it to bolster his legitimacy, not long before the Kristallnacht, before the terrible atrocities that he perpetrated. Money.
I mean, we've had not similar controversies to this in the past, but Olympic by Olympic gathering, there's a piece of political grit in the oyster, time after time after time. Is this the biggest of its kind that you can think of?
I've been writing about sport for a long time. This, for me, is without doubt the most disgraceful decision I have seen by a British sports minister by a very, very long way. And you're absolutely right. Politics can intrude into sport. For what it's worth, John, I don't know how you feel about it. I quite like to watch sport to wind down, to get away from political contention. But sometimes something happens which is so far over the line that for sport to be used as a pawn in an atrocity, one of the great crimes of our age, we can't look the other way.
Now, in the context of athletics and Olympics, and you could look more widely, football, whose the record of that sport is as stained as it could conceivably be. You wonder why the world of athletics and sport, the world of football, still smiles on these things.
Well, one reason, of course, I mean, without wanting to get overly technical, is that the governing bodies of sport, like FIFA and the IOC, they're monopoly providers. And so the people who run these organisations, you'll know from the Salt Lake City scandal, from the kickback scandal about the hosting of the World Cup events, they are profoundly corrupt institutions. And I think that is why it is easy for dictators to use dirty money. I obviously cannot corroborate that this has happened in this particular occasion, but I just say take a step back and look at how these global governing bodies are profoundly compromised, often at source.
Matthew, Syed, good to talk to you. Thank you for that look into your latest column, which is right there on the Times website now. To read that, just head to thetimes.co.uk and you can click subscribe and you will be in. Matthew, thank you.